In the Great Leap Forward, how many people died? Was it? I'm not sure how many people died in that. 40 million. The famine. Uh, something like that. Or, of course, what took place in Russia, and they will, mention the gulags and the labor camps and things like that, because it seems like within the human condition, regardless of the system of governance that emerges, there always seems to emerge a separation between those in positions of power and those without the power, despite the name that we put on it. And I think
Sure.
where, I guess I'm asking you like four questions in one, but where I'm steering this in a sense is like, one, obviously it's your opportunity to kind of explain that, but two, maybe how you see this, your version or your idea for what communism could look like in the US being different and distinguished from these other nation states that have maybe more blood on their hands because of how they administered their system of governance.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a number of things to answer there, but I mean, the first thing to point out is when you talk about the Great Leap Forward, and some people talk about Holodomor, which was a famine that took place in the Soviet Union in the early 1930s. The thing is, they're missing the forest for the trees because before 1917, there were annual deaths of malnutrition. The farming system did not have tractors, and it was the Soviet Union that built a modern mechanized farming system for Russia and cured Russia and the surrounding countries of the fact that they had malnutrition all the time. And yes, along the way, over the course of collectivization, there was a hardship and there was a period where, yes, something that happened under the old system all the time, malnutrition, happened again, but they got over it. And China is a similar story. In China, there were famines, massive famines, over and over and over when the British, took control of India with the Opium Wars and basically prevented them from developing their own economy. I mean, some estimate that as many as 100 million Chinese people may have died as an economic result of British domination, the importation of narcotics to control their economy, etc. And in 1928, there was a huge famine in China, and Edgar Snow, the American journalist, went there, and he went there and he was horrified that the fields that should have been growing food were growing opium poppies for British drug dealers. And he said, why don't the people just rise up and revolt? Well, they did, and you go through China's history, the amount of poverty that was there before the communists came in is just so massive. The amount of malnutrition that went on is massive. So yes, over the course of building up a modern country, wiping out extreme poverty, over the course of doing that, there was the Great Leap Forward, which was an awful instant where there was malnutrition and starvation. But again, if you take that episode of malnutrition and you say that's what communism is, it's like, no, that's what was there every day before the communists came in. And this is something that the communists got rid of. And maybe the manner through which they got rid of it along the way, had some problems and they mismanaged or did something incorrect and it led to problems as they were developing. But you have to look at what they ultimately accomplished, which was curing that kind of thing. I mean, it's simply not recognizing what took place. And the other thing that I've noticed is that in a lot of cases, now, you talk about the Great Leap Forward. That was
Hmm.
an episode of economic mismanagement. They were trying to speed ahead, with building up their socialist economy. The Soviet Union had cut them off. There had been a fight between the Soviet Union and China, so they didn't have a lot of aid they were promised, and they, based on a lot of bad mechanisms where they weren't getting proper information, people were lying about how much they were producing, etc. You had this mass episode. But that's not the same as Hitler having gas chambers and rounding up people on the basis of their race or ethnicity or religion, putting them on trains and gassing them to death in gas chambers, right? I mean, economic mismanagement is bad, but it's very different than intentional genocide. And
Okay.
that's one
Yeah.
thing I frequently will hear from anti-communists is they'll say, well, communism killed more than Hitler, it killed blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, we're talking about economic mismanagement versus intentional wiping out of people on the basis of their race or ethnicity. And that's two different things. But regardless, if you look at in terms of malnutrition, what the Soviet Union accomplished, they're the ones that got rid of it. If you look at in terms of malnutrition in China, it was the Chinese communists who got rid of it. So again, I feel like people are missing the forest for the trees. Now, in response to your other question, I wanted to say this, which is, again, when socialism comes to the United States, it's not going to be Chinese socialism. It's not going to be Russian socialism, Korean socialism, Cuban socialism. The only type of socialism we'll ever have in the United States will be a uniquely American form of socialism, rooted in our way of life, our own situation, the contradictions that exist in U.S. society. And freedom, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion is something that's very important to the American people. We really value entrepreneurialism and hard work in the United States. And socialism in the United States, I always point out to people in China, they call their system socialism with Chinese characteristics. And the
Okay.
socialism that will come to the United States will be a socialism with American characteristics. So as much as I want to, clear up the record to some degree or other and just push back against this communism failed everywhere it's ever been tried that we're pounded over the head with, in the United States, at the same time, I want to say, at the same time, I'm not advocating we adopt their system. I'm advocating we find our own way to build an economy that works for we, the people of the United States.